Good morning and welcome to worship with Winston-Salem Friends Meeting. My name is Cheryl Bridges and I will be bringing today's prepared message. Let's take a moment of pause before we hear today's message and connect our minds, our bodies, and our spirits together. When we think of Christmas, rarely does an image of isolation come to mind. Most people who celebrate it are more likely to imagine special gatherings with our families and friends, special meetings for worship, the bustle and crowds of shopping, and the echoes of music. A holiday season celebrated in quarantine is in direct contrast to our memories of our past and hopes for this year. But the truth of it is, Jesus' birth was considerably solitary. And for us, the return to an isolated life is an invitation to deepen, or perhaps even to begin, a sacred practice of solitude. The Christmas story begins in the book of Luke, with Mary and Joseph making their way to Bethlehem as part of a regional census. There was no room, no rest or relief for the couple in the inn. And so we learn of the newly born Jesus being laid in a manger, a trough filled with hay for animals to eat. No bustle in the crowded inn, just the quiet of a lean-to intended to protect domesticated animals. As we follow the story of Jesus, we often see him stealing away for time alone. Jesus withdrawing to lonely places is a common theme throughout the Gospels, as he often withdrew from the crowds and from the disciples. The beginning of his ministry was marked by 40 days of solitude in the desert. Actually, Jesus' ministry began and ended in a time of solitude. We see Jesus climbing mountains, hanging out in gardens, walking alone along the shore. And in a time when most travel was by foot, Jesus often walked alone, sometimes for days. What was Jesus doing all this time that he was by himself? Much of the time we read that he was praying. Jesus prayed in solitude when he had an important decision to make and needed clarity and God's guidance. The writer of Luke tells us that Jesus prayed overnight on a mountaintop before deciding on the apostles that would be his helpers. In the silence of aloneness, it's much easier to hear the whispers of spirit in our hearts. Jesus also prayed when he was distraught. Perhaps the most striking story of Jesus seeking solitude during difficult times is when he prayed alone in the Garden of Gethsemane prior to his crucifixion. When Jesus learned of the death of John the Baptist, he rowed a boat to a solitary place to grieve. During times of solitude, Jesus found strength, comfort, courage, and peace. Jesus also found rest in his aloneness and instructed the apostles to steal away for rest. Whenever the crowds and sometimes the apostles were relentless, we often read of Jesus disappearing on his own. After performing miracles, Jesus sought isolation, perhaps to rest or to restore, maybe to refocus and renew. Luke 5:15 summarizes Jesus' theology of solitude quite simply. It says, Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. He encouraged others to do the same. In Matthew 6:6, Jesus says to the disciples, "But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private." My great-greats knew when my great-great-grandmother was in prayer because she would pull her hooped skirts over her head to hide herself in a corner, which with a dozen children must have been hard to come by. They knew to leave her be. A theology of solitude didn't begin with Jesus, though. Practically every figure in the Judeo-Christian scriptures spends intentional time alone. Psalms 46 instructs us, "Be still and know." Moses isolated himself for 40 days as well, in which he prayed and fasted. Even God takes a day of solitude in the very first chapter of the very first book of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. And nearly every world religion places value on solitude as a means to deepening one's relationship with the divine. Many great voices throughout human history have commented on the value of solitude. It was Picasso who suggested that without great solitude, no serious work is possible. And if you've tried to accomplish a great task when you are in a crowded, noisy space, you'll understand what he meant. As many of us have experienced over the past 10 months, with great solitude, we can often feel more lonely than alone. Blaise Pascal, a 17th century physicist and philosopher, said, "All of humanity's problems stem from one's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Modern-day well-being pioneer Deepak Chopra writes, "To make the right choice in life, you have to get in touch with your soul. And to do this, you need to experience solitude, which most people are afraid of, because in the silence, you hear the truth and you know the solutions." Many of us have crafted a life that offers endless distractions from being in solitude. We don't want to be alone. With the expansion of the media available on internet, those distractions are so readily at hand, we pick them up almost to the point of addiction. Yet a deep solitude, one in which we have turned off all distractions and are focused in the present moment. That kind of solitude is an expansive silence, not a contractive loneliness. There is richness of presence in which we can connect not only to our hearts, but to the heart of God. And in that sense, we are never alone. One of my most favorite, can you have a most favorite quotation, speaks to a theology of solitude. It was ironically written by professed atheist Franz Kafka, who was a Bohemian-born writer from the early 20th century. Kafka wrote, "You need not leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. You need not even listen. Simply wait. Just learn to become quiet, still, and solitary. The world will offer itself to you to be unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet." In this Advent season, this time of quiet and expectant waiting, I invite you to explore how can solitude best serve you. Still away from your own distractions long enough to center down into a rich, holy time of connecting with yourself, your spirit, and with God. Take some time to become quiet, still, and solitary enough that you will hear the whispers of spirit and the world unmasks itself to you. and so it is. Amen.